me Z. And for each of you, if you have a paper and a notebook, feel free to take them out. We are going to do a little bit of an exercise. My colleague Benny here will help keep time. When we do the exercises, you'll get about 3 minutes with a minute warning. And these exercises actually will be very helpful for you to kind of craft your personal brand in the hour and a half we're going to have together. So the more vested you are, the more involved you are, actually the more you're going to get out of this. Okay, so first, a self-introduction. All right, I was born in Shanghai, China, moved to the States when I was 10 years old, grew up in Los Angeles, went to Stanford for my undergrad. I did 2 degrees, bachelor's degrees, and then I did a master's degree at Stanford. After Stanford, I went to Intel Corporation, became a managing director there. And while I was at Intel, they sent me to Harvard for my MBA. After Intel, I actually worked for President Obama in the White House. And after that, I came back to China to start a company. It's a financial services data company, about 300 employees, and it's still around. And after that, I decided to move back to the States and started a venture fund focusing on education and healthcare. And in between, I had a chance to write a couple books. They've sold pretty well, probably about 200,000 copies. And I spent quite a bit of my time touring around China, giving talks. So that's my quick introduction. And when you hear it, some of you may say, oh, that sounds interesting. Other of you may say, seems a little legitimate, right? But honestly, in the areas, in the circles that I hang around, it's dime a dozen. The fact is, all of you are very successful where you are today. And as you progress in your success, and as you look around, if all your success is on your resume, on that CV, it's dime a dozen. Right? If you really think about what a CV is, it's your work experiences, it's your education background, it's your extracurricular interest. And if you flip through enough resumes, and I've had an occasion through all my different jobs to probably interview several thousand people, the resumes start to look the same. And so how do we break out of that? Because especially in this world of today, we know that competition is fierce. Competition is everywhere. We're not just competing with the best of our country. We're competing with the best of our world. I mean, look around. You have some of your best friends for life, but some of your fiercest competitors sitting next to you. And beyond competition being fierce, we're also facing very uncertain times. Right? The macroeconomic environment is something that none of us can control. I can tell you, in 2008, I had a few friends from business school. They were at Lehman Brothers. They were doing extremely well, managing director, just having the time of their lives. And then all of a sudden, a bank that was over 100 years old went bankrupt. And for a few years later, they couldn't even find a job. And those are not isolated stories. And more than that, we also know that technology is changing our lives very quickly. Right? Artificial intelligence is upending the world and destroying a lot of jobs we take for granted. And these are not low-ended jobs. Some of you might have watched a movie about Wall Street, especially in the 80s. You might recall there's a position called market maker. These are the guys that are standing on the exchange floors, holding these slips of paper, shouting, I want to buy this many shares, I want to sell this many shares. Now, even today, if you're a successful entrepreneur, a milestone for success is to be on that little balcony at the NASDAQ, ringing the bell. But an interesting phenomenon is you'll never see who's actually on the floor because there's nobody on the floor anymore. It's all being automated, computerized. One of the most coveted, prestigious jobs on Wall Street, just about 2 decades ago, is no more. There's no more. So with that fierce competition, with an uncertain world, with technology overtaking a lot of our jobs, how do we stay relevant? How do we not just survive but thrive? Now, personal brand, we all know is something that's very important, right? It's something that we can carry with us. Traditionally, a personal brand is actually associated with the platforms, right? Our personal brand is we went to this school, or we work for this company, or we have this title at this institution. And while we're at those platforms, if I'm a vice president at Google, I get a lot of invitations. I get to speak at conferences, I get to attend events. I feel like I have a lot of power. But imagine as soon as you leave, imagine somebody standing here talking about artificial intelligence. Instead of a vice president of today, he was the vice president 2 years ago or 3 years ago. What's your immediate reaction? I don't know, right? Maybe some of the things he says could be outdated. Maybe he's not as relevant anymore. Because traditionally, our personal brands are associated with the platforms. And that works great for our grandfathers, for our grandmothers, when we all worked for one company. But in this world of today, we know that we work for multiple companies, maybe even multiple industries. We might start companies, we might sell companies, our companies might go bankrupt, they might get disrupted. And so the traditional way of actually acquiring your personal brand, right? The steady way of getting into the best schools, which you've done, which I've done, right? After getting into the best schools, try to get into the best institutions, the best companies. Let's get a McKinsey, on my resume, right? Let's get a Morgan Stanley or a Goldman Sachs on my resume. That's all good, but that might not be sufficient. And how did I come about this? So, about 5 years ago, 2014, I decided to take a year off. I realized that even though on paper, I seemed to be doing pretty well. My company was growing. On paper, the company was worth quite a bit. But I realized that many of the areas I thought was most important to my life, not only was I not progressing, I was regressing. Right? I'm talking about personal health. I'm talking about interpersonal relationships, emotional mastery, the ability to manage my own wealth, but also the ability to plan my own career. I realized that even though I went to a few good schools, and all of you are students and graduates of great schools, but I have a feeling that those schools, like mine, didn't really teach you a lot of the most critical life skills you need. And so for that year, I actually devised my own life MBA. I went about and found 20 authorities and experts in these 6 areas I thought most important in my life. And that was the basis of my second book. But I'm not here to tell you about my second book. I'm here to share with you what I learned about personal brand, and that took me on a completely different journey from everything I did previously. So as part of that year's Life MBA, I joined a program called Schultzberger Program. The Schultzberger family is the family that started New York Times. Very, very well known in America. Very, very powerful in the media world. And in collaborations with the journalism school at Columbia, they started the Schultzberger Program, specifically for very senior media executives to help them chart a course in this very fast-changing media world. And so it was a program about 20 people. Almost all of them were very senior executives from the traditional large media companies. Because I invested and started media companies prior, was kind of the token Silicon Valley guy. We had, for example, the head of social media at CNN, the associate managing editor and the chief innovation officer at New York Times, the second in command at NPR, the executive producer of NewsHour at PBS, et cetera, et cetera. And so for the entire year, we would get together every quarter for about a week, from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m., and we would talk about what's going on in the media world. And the business models are changing. This was 2014. Now very quickly, something emerged. which is the election cycle in America. And one personality emerged even quicker, Donald Trump. The funny thing is, at first, everyone's attitude in my class towards Donald Trump was one of mockery. Right? This guy's a joke. I mean, he's just there to liven up the debates, liven up the conversation. There's no way he can win. Complete joke. It very quickly progressed to an utter disbelief. How is this happening? How is this guy, which every thoughtful media executive thought was a joke, he was winning in the polls. And he was, on his path towards becoming the Republican nominee, right? The nominee for the President of the United States of one of the two main political parties in America. Complete disbelief. But then it also quickly changed into outrage. Complete outrage. How can this guy attack traditional media outlets? Now you have to remember, for hundreds of years, these major media outlets made or broke candidates. If New York Times or Washington Post or Wall Street Journals endorsed the candidate, the chance of that candidate getting elected was very high. If they went hard against the candidate, that candidate pretty much had no chance. Trump not only went against these media outlets, he went hard against them, right? He called CNN fake news. In his rallies, he pointed specifically at these major outlets and said, these guys, they're fake, right? These guys are liars. This was a complete outrage. I mean, these media executives could not figure it out. And then it progressed to a keen interest because they knew something was changing. Something big was changing in front of our eyes. And these are very smart people, and they wanted to figure out why. And very quickly, they realized that Trump was probably the best example of this new world of personal brand building. And he was leveraging two specific trends that each one of us will be able to leverage in building our personal brand in this world of digital changes. The first is distribution is now free. Now, for the longest time, if you wanted to have a brand that more than your friends knew about, more than your colleagues knew about, you needed approval from one of the gatekeepers, right? If you wanted to get on TV, you needed approval from the TV hosts. If you wanted to get a newspaper, you needed approval from the editors. If you want to get a magazine, etc., etc. There were a finite number of major distribution outlets, and they were gatekeepers. But all of a sudden, distribution is free. Literally today, you can reach billions of people around the world by simply logging on to any of the free social media platforms out there. And Trump was the best example for that. And the second thing that our class at the Schultzberger program realized was, you don't have to be an expert to be an expert anymore. You don't have to be an expert to be an expert anymore. For the longest time, if you think about it, to be an expert, to qualify for an expert, you had to have years and decades of experience, recognized by your peers, lauded by the community. And then you might have a shot if you were chosen by a media gatekeeper. But all of a sudden, you have this guy with zero experience in politics talking about how he was going to run the biggest country, the biggest economy in the world. And I'll give you another example. For the longest time, if you're in fashion, what you needed to do was win the favor of an editor of one of the major publications. For example, if you're running a show in New York, you have to make sure the editor at Vogue likes you. If she does, you have a good chance. If she doesn't, oof, you're dead. And then all of a sudden, in the last decade or so, you had these media darlings these 16, 17, 18-year-olds blogging about fashion. And they were so influential that all of a sudden, people started to follow their inputs. And these so-called gatekeepers of yesterday, the editors of Vogue, etc., realized that they had new competitors. And so today, if you went to the New York fashion shows, you realize on the front rows, there's still a few editors from the major publications, but there are these 15, 16, 17-year-old girls, literally girls, teenagers, with as much influence, if not more, than the traditional gatekeepers. Now, if you look at the backgrounds of these girls, do they have years of experience in the fashion industry? No. Did they go to a qualified school like, a Parsons or a FIT? No. Did they pay their dues and work years and years at a fashion magazine? No. But because they were able to leverage their so-called expertise at one of these social platforms, all of a sudden, they became an expert. And so when you realize the power of the changed landscape, the fact that access is now free, distribution is now free, and that you don't have to be an expert to be an expert, then all of a sudden you realize that each one of us, starting today, could be a world-renowned expert in an area of our choosing. That was mind-boggling. And one of the other things that's also very exciting that each of us can take advantage of is the fact that we are in a gig economy now. What's the definition of a gig economy? A gig economy is whereas traditionally you worked for one company, or maybe for different companies in one industry. Today, there's a chance to potentially work in one industry for a year or 2 years, a decade or 2 decades, and then switch to a completely different industry, and work there for a decade or 2 decades. And then switch to a completely different industry and work there for a decade or 2 decades. Again, Trump is the perfect example, right? He started off as a real estate developer in New York City. And then he became an author, and then a TV personality. And now he's a politician. And it's actually very credible to imagine that after the presidency, he could be something else. He could be something more. This is not just particular to Trump. Each of us now has a chance to design our career as a giga career. Each of us has a chance to pursue multiple of our passions. I give a lot of talks. In the past 2 years, I've probably done about online, offline, 200-300 talks around China, 30, 40 different cities. Probably reached, I would say, 5 to 6 million people online, offline. And I get this question a lot. A lot of young people will come to me and say, I have so many different passions. Right? What do I do? What should I choose? And the beauty with this gig economy that we're living in now, that each of you guys will help shape, is the fact that you may not have to make a choice. You can actually live all of your different passions. They could happen at the same time. They could happen at different stages of your life, but it's very possible. And so Trump is a great example. All right, so in this new world, if we are to build a personal brand, how do we do it? And before we go into how do we do it, why is this so important? Because so many of you guys, and I've seen this with my career and with the careers of so many of my friends, will start companies, will join companies, will quit companies, will have your company go bankrupt, will have your companies disrupted, will switch different companies and different industries. The only thing you can take with you is your personal brand. And if you do well, if you do it well enough, your personal brand will actually grow with you with each of those changes. In a world where there's almost very little you can control what's going to happen to the platforms you will join. Your personal brand might be the only thing you have control of. The only thing. And sometimes some of the students I've spoken to might say, you know what, this sounds all good, but I got busy things to do, you know. I got courses to take, exams to prepare for. I don't have time for this. What we don't understand and realize is, in this digital world, even when we're not consciously building our personal brand, we're still building it, right? If you add me as your friend on WeChat, for example, if I look at your moments, I have a good sense, you know, what kind of person you are, what your interests are, what you're leaning towards, right? And with social media, if you have any footprint, somebody's gonna analyze you and have a good sense of what you represent. So even if you don't think you're building your personal brand, you are. So you better take control of it and proactively build it, because that's probably gonna be the one thing you can control throughout your life. And if you do well enough, even if you suffer setbacks in your career, even if the company you're with goes bankrupt, you're actually gonna still do better and potentially benefit from that. Whereas, like I said before, if you're always tying yourself to particular platforms, you're at the whim of somebody else. You're at the whim of a macro economy that you have very little control of. So how many of you guys are convinced now that you should spend some time on your personal brand? Say aye. All right, good. Very good. Now, like I said, we're gonna have to do a little bit more exercise, and then I'm gonna ask some questions, so we'll make this participatory. And so the more you participate, the more you get involved, the more you'll get out of it. Next, we're gonna jump into 4 steps to building your personal brand. Step number 1 is know your niche and know your tribe. What does that mean? We can't have a personal brand to signify everything, right? We gotta know what our niche is. And what's our niche? It first has to start with, what are our passions? What are we excited about? Because your personal brand has to be something that you're vested in over time. It's gotta be something that you're willing to put in the time, day after day after day, building. It has to be authentic, right? It has to be you. So it has to be something that you're passionate about. So that's your niche. But then again, just having your niche, just having your passion doesn't quite qualify as a personal brand. You have to know what your tribe is. Meaning, who are the people who are equally excited about what you're excited about? What are their needs? Who are these people? Now, I'll give you an example for myself. Like I was telling you guys, I was born in Shanghai when I was 10. When I moved to the States in the 80s, there weren't many Chinese students of my age in America. Now nowadays, there are tons of Chinese students of various ages. But during my day, most Chinese students were graduate students like my father who went to study after college. Very few at a young age like myself. So I get asked a lot by people, so where are you from? And I would tell them, I'm from China. And they would say, yeah, you're Chinese. Okay. But then I realized when I came back to China, people would still ask me, where are you from? And I said, I'm from the US. And they said, oh yeah, you're an American. So for a very long time I was confused. Am I Chinese? Am I American? But then after a lot of thinking and self-reflection, I realized I don't think I have to choose. I could actually be a bridge. In the world, China, US, need more bridges like myself. And so that was something I was very passionate about, by serving as a bridge. That was something that I thought was very authentic to me. That could be my personal brand. But then who's my tribe? I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And then you'll also spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. And the only way you can figure it out is through trial and error. And so through trial and error, I realized my tribe is actually Chinese parents Because I have yet to meet a Chinese parent who doesn't want their kid to be a global citizen, who doesn't want their kid to be a global leader. And a definition of a global leader is someone who understands what's outside of China, especially what the Western world, what America is all about. But someone that still has deep roots in China, who's fluent in Chinese culture, and who could traverse between the two, in a way serve as a bridge. And so I realized there was this huge need by these Chinese parents to understand, how do I foster my kids? How do I train them to become a global citizen, a global leader, a bridge to the outside world? Okay, I found my niche and I found my tribe. And you can see that connection, if you do it right, is super, super deep. I'll give you another example. I have after one of my talks, I had this lady come up to me. She's like, my personal passion is nonprofits. I really want to do good for the world. And she, of course, showed me her CV. Looks quite good, right? She went to a pretty good school in the US. She worked for the US government for a while, and she worked for a few international NGOs. Looked pretty good, but honestly, dime a dozen. And for her, it took her a while when she came back to the States to look for a job. Because if you're just looking at the resume, it's dime a dozen. Especially the positions you're gonna want, just like the position she wanted. Everybody else has the exact same resume. And so she was really struggling. She's like, what you said really resonated with me, right? I need to have a personal brand. I need to stand out. But what's my niche? I know my niche is, to communicate to the nonprofit world, to really help people. But I don't know what my tribe is. So we sat down and I asked her to really think about it. And she thought about it and she came back and said, you know what? My family, she's from a small town in America. My family has had a family foundation for several generations. It's not a big foundation. It's about $100,000, but we've kept it going for a long time. And one of the things that I really am passionate about is for people who have maybe $100,000, $200,000 to give to philanthropy, how do they think about doing it? Because she knew that in the market, if you're a big foundation, if you're like the Ford Foundation, if you're the Rockefeller Foundation, if you're giving out millions of dollars a year, there's a huge swath of experts catering to your needs, right? But for people who are kind of stuck in the middle, who's giving out $100,000, $200,000, which is a good sum of money, but it's not a lot, really they get no support. And so she said, well, I think I found my niche and my tribe. Right? These are my people because my family has been doing it generation after generation. We've accumulated decades of experience of how to do it right. And there's that group of people out there. They may number in the tens of thousands, or around the world, hundreds of thousands, or maybe even millions. But they really need my help. And I can really relate to them. And this is something that I'm passionate about doing day after day, year after year. All right, so that's what we need to first figure out. Know your niche and know your tribe. So I'm gonna give everybody about 3 minutes. My colleague Benny is gonna give you a 1 minute warning. Let's really write it down and think really hard. What's my niche and what's my tribe? Think hard. What am I passionate about? Again, you don't have to be the best in the world, like I said, but it's gotta be something you're really passionate about. And who's my tribe? What are their needs that my passions can uniquely connect with and contribute to and help with?
One minute pass. Two minutes.
And if you think you have a few niches, you can write them all down. Remember, you don't have to pick and choose right now.
Okay, 30 minutes. Time's up.
All right, thank you. Who would like to share? And when you do, please tell me your name and where you're from. Anybody? If you don't raise your hand, I'm going to cold call you. All right, let's give a round of applause. Oh yeah, sorry. I think I said, let's give a huge round of applause.
I'm Ksenia. I was born in Russia and grew up in Holland for about half my life. So you already kind of said it. It was hard not to unthink it, but I think about myself as a bridge between different cultures and interests and disciplines as well. And as about tribe, it's a challenging one to define, but I think people that really like to dream and think of making world a better place. I'm still narrowing it down, so that's it for now.
Very good. Let's give her another round of applause. So that's a very good start, right? And when you start thinking about your brand, personal brand, it's easy to keep it at a very high, vague level. But remember, it's also very important to go as specific and as concrete as possible, because ultimately, we are flooded with information. If you want to truly have a tribe that stick with you, there's got to be something that connects with them in a very deep, profound level, right? On an emotional level. For example, I found these Chinese parents because you know Chinese parents. All of you probably have met Chinese parents. The number one most important thing in their lives is what? How to plan their kids' lives, right? How to manage every detail of their kids' lives. And so for them, this is not I don't think I need to spend time on this. This is, okay, I need to figure this out, right? One of the things I'm really impressed with Chinese parents is they spend more time figuring out their kids' lives than their kids. So you got to understand your tribe in a very deep, profound way. And the best is, again, try and error, right? So your high level might be people who are passionate about Will you say it again? Your tribe is, at this time, who are they? In one sentence.
Changing the world for a better place.
Right, changing the world for a better place. Very broad. So talk to sub-segments of people that fit that profile, right? Narrow it down. And then soon you'll get a chance, okay, you know what? Some of that subgroup, they're great, but they're probably not my tribe. But there's a particular subgroup that, wow, amazing. Another thing that most people make a mistake when they think about personal brand is, I want a huge tribe. It's not the breadth of your tribe, it's the depth, right? You want people that go with you till the end of the earth, not a bunch of people that might or may not follow you. Because you have a viral video, yeah, they'll follow you, but tomorrow there's another viral video. They're not your tribe, right? If your tribe is just 10,000 people, or if your tribe is just 1,000 people, but they're so deep such that they're willing to spend time and energy and pay to see you talk, that's a good tribe. That's probably better tribe than an Instagram model that has 1 million followers. But there's probably 1 million Instagram models just like her, right? Can we get another person to share? All right, let's give her another hand in the middle.
Hi, so my name is Tina, and I'm from Suzhou, so it's like an hour from where you're from. So I went to US for college, and then I worked in New York doing investment banking in JP Morgan. Then I moved to Hong Kong, and I'm currently working in Beijing in one of the BAT firms doing strategy and investment. So I guess that my
Great resume, right?
Yeah, I guess my niche would be, I think I have a good understanding, and I really spend a lot of time in understanding like both China and US, maybe especially the tech landscape, because this is part of my job. And I guess my tribe, I would think about it from the perspective of like who I interact with the most in my daily life, and probably one group of friends that I would define as my tribe are people working in the tech industry but previously worked in the financial industry. Because I think that we look at things maybe from, so when we look at a tech company, we probably try to understand like their products, like the people that they're serving, their overall strategy, but we also look at maybe their performance in the stock market, or maybe any other companies that are relevant to this company, like their performance in the stock market. So I think that we understand the tech world from a more holistic perspective. Yeah, so I think that's my tribe.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is very good. You're seeing she's getting a lot more specific, right? Now, what I would invite you to think about next is, what is the need that you're specifically fulfilling, that you're uniquely fulfilling? Again, you don't have to be the best in the world, because if there's a need, chances are people are not fulfilling it. So if you're just the first one to do it, you're already considered an expert, right? So you don't have to be the best of the best. A lot of us are still stuck in the sense of, okay, I need to be the best of the best to be an expert. You don't. You can just be the first, right? You can be the first person to really think about, okay, how do I find a solution to this need? But you really have to think a little bit harder of, okay, you find your subgroup. I bet because of your experiences, you relate with them very well. You have a better sense of, what their needs are. But specifically, what is an ongoing need that's unmet and that you can uniquely do? Very well, very good. And remember, the talk today is an introductory course for you to really go home and think hard. And then think hard about what are the subsegments, how do I spend time meeting these people, and through trial and error, have a good sense of my personal niche coupled or matched with the needs of my tribe. Step 2, know your platforms. There's so many platforms out there, But think about, for your niche and for your tribe, where do they live? Which platforms do they live? For example, if they're professionals, they might be living mostly on LinkedIn. If they're women, 70% of Pinterest users are women, right? If they're kind of young, they might just be on Douyin. You really have to think about, if you've identified your tribe, where do they live? And also think about the type of content and expertise I want to convey. What is the format of that? Is it purely writing? So I could just write articles on WeChat? Is it more photo or imagery? So I could post them on Instagram? Is it more short snippets that convey powerful emotional critiques of what's happening in the moment? So I could put them on Weibo or Twitter? Or is it video that's multimedia focused that I can post them on YouTube? The next thing we really have to think about is know your platforms. Where does my tribe reside, and how do I best communicate with them? So I'll give you an example for myself. I started blogging about 2 years ago, after I kind of realized my niche and my tribe. And I blogged because I realized if I wanted to communicate with them, it had to be pretty good content that people have to spend, at least a few minutes, probably 10 minutes or 15 minutes reading. Started blogging, posting them on WeChat. In 6 month time, I had about probably 50 million reads. I knew, okay, this was a good platform. It hit the mark. And from there, I progressed to other platforms. For example, I realized, okay, some people may not have the ability to read, sit down and read. They might want to listen. And in China, one of the biggest exploding areas, platforms, are these audio listening platforms like Himalaya, like Dedao, like Fanden Du Shu Hui. So that was another great way to communicate the content that requires people to spend 10, 15 minutes, except not reading, but also listening. So for example, on Fanden Du Shu Hui, you guys can find my book. Probably about 5 million people have listened to it. Okay, it's a platform that's a fit for me. But some of the other platforms might not be a good fit for me. I might want to be on it, but it's probably not best for me. And so for each of us, we should start thinking about what's a good platform. So many of us get taken by the fact that, man, I want to be on every single platform. Ideally, I want to have millions of followers on every single platform. But the best is you probably want to have one platform that really resonates with your tribe, and it's the best format. And over time, you might progress to other platforms, but you always have at least one key platforms. So if you think about it, what's Trump's platform? Twitter, right? Because Trump doesn't have a lot of substantive stuff to say. What he wants to do is to get people really emotional over taglines that he comes up with, because he's really good, right? We make fun of him, but he is a genius in coming up with taglines that resonate with people. And so Twitter is the perfect fit for him, right? Build the wall. Perfect fit. People go, wow, build the wall, right? Or no money to Puerto Rico. No money to Puerto Rico, right? Twitter is perfect. But imagine, Trump trying to do that, on WeChat, writing a 1,500 word essay, right? It doesn't work very well. It doesn't work not just for him, it doesn't work for his tribe. His tribe's probably not going to read that much. And so we have to understand, what is your platform? Okay, so I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes this time to write down the type of format you want to use to communicate your expertise, to communicate your stories, and what might be a really good platform that you might want to use to start off. So 2 minutes.